In the first quarter of the 18th century, at the height of absolutism and the wealth provided by Brazil's gold and diamonds, an unparalleled monumental project was born in Portugal. A few kilometers from Lisbon, King John V had one of the largest palaces in Europe built, consisting of a splendid basilica, a Franciscan convent, and a vast royal palace, whose imposing facade stretches for 220 meters. It also has one of the most beautiful libraries in the world, with a collection of 36,000 volumes. Join us in exploring the history, art, facts and myths of the royal building of Mafra, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Come and discover Portugal with us. Please like, subscribe and leave your comment. Your support and opinions are very important to us. Thank you. At the beginning of the 18th century, Portugal was experiencing one of the most peculiar and remarkable periods in its history, characterized by the apogee of royal absolutism under the reign of King John V. This monarch, deeply inspired by the model of Louis XIV in France, sought to assert his image and authority through monumental works and artistic and cultural patronage. The economic prosperity of this period was mainly due to the discovery of large gold and diamond deposits in Brazil, especially in the regions of Minas Gerais, such as the mines of Vila Rica, now Ouro Preto, Sabará, Mariana and São João del Rei, in Goiás and Mato Grosso. Extraction was carried out by African slaves and local workers in harsh and often inhumane conditions. These resources gave rise to the so-called Brazilian royal fifths, a tax equivalent to 1/5, 20%, of all gold mined, which was to be sent to Portugal as direct revenue for the crown. The remaining 4/5 of the gold mine remained in Brazil, but most of it ended up in the hands of local elites, influential miners, and colonial authorities who dominated the economic structure of the territory. This gold arrived in Lisbon mainly in the form of ingots or bars cast in official foundries, such as the famous Casa de Fundição de Vila Rica, marked with the Portuguese royal seal to prevent fraud and smuggling. Cargoes crossed the Atlantic Ocean in annual naval fleets, heavily escorted to protect against attacks by pirates and privateers who prowled the sea lanes. In Brazil, this period was characterized by intense exploitation and the constant drain of natural resources to Portugal, a reality that provoked deep resentment and often stimulated protest movements, such as the revolt of Filipe dos Santos in Vila Rica in 1720. The wealth generated by mining did not translate into an equitable development of the colony, but rather into an exploitative economy that fed the luxuries of the Portuguese metropolis and kept Brazil in a subordinate position. This abundance allowed King John V to carry out sumptuous projects that exalted his figure and consolidated the prestige of the Portuguese crown. However, it also intensified social inequalities, for while the court, nobility and clergy enjoyed increasing luxuries, the common people faced significant economic hardship. Politically, the reign of John V reinforced absolutism and promoted intense diplomatic activity aimed at strengthening Portugal's international position and prestige. close relations were established with the Vatican materialized in acts such as the granting of the title of King Most Faithful by the Pope in 1748, which further elevated the diplomatic status of the Portuguese king. Socially, the deep-rooted religiosity in Portuguese daily life justified large investments in religious buildings, considered essential means to ensure collective spiritual salvation. It was in this context that in 1711 King John V promised to build a convent if he had offspring, a promise that was fulfilled with the birth of Princess Maria Barbara on 4 December 1711. The site chosen for the construction of this convent was the town of Mafra, located some 30 kilometers from Lisbon. The hill on which it stands was known as Alto da Vela, where there were windmills and farmland. The land was acquired in 3 phases between 1713 and 1748. According to Friar Claudio Conceição, this place was chosen because it had an abundant and excellent source of water and a marvelous view of the wide sea. On 17 November 1717, the foundation stone of the convent of Mafra was laid, an act of great pomp attended by the king, the court, the Cardinal Patriarch of Lisbon, Tomás de Almeida, and a crowd that included clergy, military and local residents. Historical sources, such as the account of Friar João de São José do Prado, confirm that a wooden structure was erected for the occasion, reproducing the shape and size envisaged for the basilica. The structure, located in the transverse zone between the foundations, was adorned with denim and precious ornaments, serving as a visual symbol of the project. The day before, on 16 November, a 4.8-meter wooden cross was blessed and raised on the site of the future high altar, which remained there until the consecration of the basilica in 1730. The ceremony included music, clarinet, timpani, and the participation of 66 Franciscan friars, as well as cavalry and infantry forces. Originally conceived as a modest Franciscan convent for 13 friars, it quickly evolved into one of the largest and most impressive architectural projects of the European Baroque, the ultimate symbol of the absolute power of the Portuguese king and the material expression of the ephemeral wealth provided by Brazilian gold. In addition to fulfilling his religious vow, the king wanted to create a monument that would symbolize the greatness of the Portuguese monarchy. It served as a secondary royal residence, a hunting ground due to its proximity to the Tapada Nacional de Mafra, and a religious center for the Franciscan friars. There is also an unofficial account mentioned in some sources, according to which King John V was inspired by the Palace of Versailles, seeking to rival the opulence of other European courts. It was built by the German architect Johann Friedrich Ludwig, known in Portugal as João Frederico Ludovice, with contributions from other architects such as Joaquim Posidónio da Silva, Manuel Caetano de Souza, Custódio Vieira, Manuel da Maia, and João Pedro Ludovice. Ludwig was a goldsmith of German origin who emigrated to Italy and settled in Portugal in the 18th century. His work brought him to the attention of the royal house, and King John V commissioned him to restructure the Paço da Ribeira chapel, transforming it into the Patriarchal Church of Lisbon. This church, destroyed by the 1755 earthquake, was described at the time as one of the most magnificent chapels in Europe, with a splendid interior and beautiful objects of worship. In addition to the Mafra project, to which he dedicated several years of his life and where he founded the Szkoła do Risku, where several architects were trained, Ludwig also left us works such as the chancel and high altar in Évora Cathedral, the main altar of the church of the monastery of São Vicente de Fora in Lisbon, and the Quinta da Alfarrobeira Palace, also in Lisbon, where the German architect lived. The construction process of the vast Mafra building involved advanced techniques for the time, such as the use of 400 kilograms of gunpowder to blast the rocks and lay the foundations. Some 50,000 workers were involved in construction, with a daily average of 15,000 and peaks of up to 45,000. Most of them were Portuguese workers, many of them forced laborers from various regions of the country. To provide an idea of the human dimension of this project, the cities of Vila Real, Castelo Branco and Évora currently have about 50,000 inhabitants. The construction project transformed the town of Mafra with the creation of a temporary quarter known as Wooden Island, built in wood to house the workers, with houses, stables, a chapel and eating areas. The construction was so dangerous that at least 1,383 workers died and thousands were injured, leading to the creation of an on-site hospital to treat the workers. The works were supervised by 7,000 soldiers who ensured order and prevented escapes. Many workers settled in Mafra, bringing their families with them, which increased the local population. Specialized craftsmen, such as sculptors and stonemasons, many of them Italian, also contributed to the artistic quality of the project. The Mafra Sculpture School, founded during the construction, trained generations of Portuguese sculptors, such as Joaquim Machado Castro. The logistics of construction were a monumental challenge. Local materials such as Liège limestone were extracted from nearby quarries, while marble, statues, ornaments and bells were imported from Italy, France, Flanders and Liège. Transport involved 1,300 ox carts and 7,000 wheelbarrows. The timber for the scaffolding came from Northern Europe, and the project required complex coordination to manage labor and resources. The town of Mafra became a large construction yard, with temporary accommodation, kitchens and a wooden church for religious services. Nobel Prize-winning author José Saramago described in his novel Balthazar and Blimunda the transport of a giant stone, illustrating the immense logistical difficulties faced by the workers. There was news that it was necessary to go to Perpinheiro to pick up a very large stone that was there, destined for the balcony that will be on the portico of the church. The stone was so excessive that 200 oxen were needed to carry it, and many men also had to go to help. In Perpinheiro, the carriage that would transport the block was built, a kind of sailing ship with wheels, according to those who had seen it in its final phase and had also seen the real ship. The stone slab is 35 meters long, 15 meters wide and 4 meters thick, and to complete the story, once carved and polished in Mafra, it will only become a little smaller. We will say that the weight of the stone of the balcony of the church, that is to be called Benedictione, is 31,021 kilos, 31 tons in round numbers. 200 oxen started moving, pulling, first in a snap, then with a continuous force, which was soon interrupted, because some slip, others lean outwards or inwards. From here to Mafra, despite the king's order to repair the pavement, the road is difficult, always going up and down, sometimes flanking the valleys, sometimes rising to the heights or plunging to the bottom. That first day, which was only in the afternoon, they took no more than 500 steps. The next day was one of great anguish. The road widened a little, thus the ox team could maneuver more freely without being run over, but the cart, due to its size, the rigidity of the axles and also the load it was carrying, turned with difficulty on bends. But the distress turned to agony if the road was downhill. At every moment the car came off, the chocks had to be put in place immediately, almost all the joints had to be uncoupled, 3 or 4 on each side were enough to move the stone, but then the men had to hold on to the ropes at the back of the platform, hundreds of men like ants, feet on the ground, bodies leaning backwards, muscles tense, holding the car, threatening to drag them into the valley, to throw them out of the curve like a whip. So great had been the suffering during this long day that everyone said tomorrow can't be any worse, yet they knew it would be 1,000 times worse. They remembered the road that went down to the Shelage Valley, those sharp bends, those astonishing gradients, those steep slopes that loomed almost vertically over the road. The levers are applied on the 4 rear wheels, trying to move the car half a centimeter to the outside of the curve, and the men working on the ropes help by pulling in the same direction. It's chaos, with those on the levers standing outside amidst a forest of tense and stretched ropes, like razor wire, with those on the ropes sometimes arranged downhill, often slipping and rolling, so far without major damage. Perhaps Francisco Marques was distracted, or he wiped the sweat from his forehead with his arm, or he looked at his village of Shelage finally remembering his wife. The wedge slipped out of his hand just as the platform slid down. We don't know how it happened, only that the body is under the car, crushed. The first wheel went over him, more than 30 tons of stone alone, if we still remember. The wheel had passed over his belly, turned into a paste of entrails and bones, his legs almost separated from his torso. Tomorrow, before dawn, the stone will resume its journey. In Shelage there was a man to bury and the meat of 2 oxen to eat. Their absence is not perceptible. The car goes uphill as slowly as it came. If God had pity on men, he would have made a world as shallow as the palm of his hand. The stones would take less time to arrive. They spent 8 whole days between Perpigneiro and Mafra. When they entered the construction site, it was as if they had arrived from a lost war, dirty, ragged, and without wealth. Everyone marveled at the size of the stone, so big, but Balthasar murmured, looking at the basilica, so small. The basilica and the convent were inaugurated on 22 October 1730, on the 41st birthday of King John V, with celebrations that lasted 8 days, although work continued until 1755, when the workforce was redirected to the reconstruction of Lisbon after the earthquake of that year. The royal building of Mafra is one of the largest palaces in Europe, with an area of approximately 38,000 square meters, almost 4 hectares. The complex includes 1,200 rooms, more than 4,700 doors and windows, 156 staircases and 29 interior courtyards. The main facade is 220 meters long, with the basilica on the central axis, flanked by 2 carillon towers, with a total of 98 bells, making it the largest historic carillon in the world. At 58 meters long and with a Latin cross plan, the Basilica of Mafra stands out for its sumptuous sculptural decoration, considered the largest collection of Italian Baroque sculpture outside Italy. The main facade of the basilica, entirely clad in white Lioge limestone from the Mafra region, imposes itself in the center of the palace, with a symmetrical Italian-inspired design flanked by 2 tall bell towers. Structured on 2 floors with Corinthian columns, the facade reflects King John V's ambition to rival the grandeur of Rome. He asked his ambassador for models of the main Roman temples. This study resulted, for example, in the central blessing balcony, clearly inspired by that of St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican. The two bell towers, some 68 meters high, are reminiscent of the towers of the church of Sant'Agnese in Agone, designed by Francesco Borromini in Rome. Between the towers stretches the central body of the church, marked by columns and three aligned portals. Above the portals is a gallery with the aforementioned balcony and, at the top, a classical triangular pediment. On the tympanum of this pediment is an immense oval jasper medallion, carved in high relief by the Italian Giuseppe Lironi in 1730. The medallion depicts the Virgin and Child Jesus and Saint Anthony in adoration, a composition that alludes to the patron saints of the Basilica, Our Lady and Saint Anthony, and to the spiritual dedication of the monastic complex. In the niches of the facade there are four large sculptures in Carrara marble, representing founders of religious orders, all by renowned Italian sculptors. On the upper level, on the north side, is Saint Dominic, and on the south side is Saint Francis of Assisi. On the lower level, a line below, are Saint Clare of Assisi on the north side and Saint Elizabeth of Hungary on the south side. These pieces, about 3 meters high, were commissioned by King John V from master sculptors in Rome. Carlo Monaldi, a Roman sculptor, sculpted Saint Francis and Saint Dominic, while Giovanni Battista Maini sculpted Saint Clare and Saint Elizabeth. The Galilee of the Basilica of Mafra, a large vestibule 7 meters wide and 28 meters long that precedes the nave, serves as a transitional space between the exterior and the sacred interior, and is decorated with a remarkable sculptural ensemble. At the sides of this narthex there are 3 entrance portals, one in the center and 2 on either side, topped by pediments and decorated with classical motifs in relief. The main portal has a raised pediment with an oval medallion, decorated with a bas-relief depicting the Madonna, Child and Saint Anthony by Carlo Monaldi. The gallery contains a group of 14 monumental marble statues, about 3 to 4 meters high, depicting saints linked to the main religious orders, in a kind of assembly of monastic patrons that introduces the conventual character of the temple. The 2 largest sculptures in the gallery flank the central doorway. On the north side is Saint Vincent, patron saint of Lisbon, and on the south side Saint Sebastian, protector against plague and famine. Both measure around 3.6 meters and were sculpted in 1731 by the Roman Carlo Monaldi, who left his signature discreetly sculpted on the helmet of Saint Sebastian, showing his pride in the work. These 2 imposing, richly sculpted images, St. Vincent wears a dalmatic and holds the palm of martyrdom, and the Gospel, St. Sebastian displays the arrows of his torture, symbolically guard the entrance to the church, flanking the person who enters. In addition to these, 12 other statues are distributed throughout the narthex, next to the pillars and inside niches. On the north side of the vestibule are Saint Benedict of Norcia, founder of the Benedictines, and Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, Cistercian reformer, both sculpted by the Italian Giuseppe Rusconi around 1731, as well as Saint Bruno of Cologne, founder of the Carthusians, attributed to Giuseppe Lironi, and Saint John of Matta, founder of the Trinitarian Order, sculpted by Pietro Bracci. On the south side of the gallery, in correspondence, other reformers are represented. Saint Francis of Paula, founder of the Minims, Saint Felix of Valois, co-founder of the Trinitarians, companion of John of Matta, Saint Peter Nolasco, founder of the Mercedarians, and Saint Caetan of Thiene, founder of the Theatines. The group is completed by Saint Ignatius of Loyola, founder of the Jesuits, Saint Teresa of Avila, reformer of the Discalced Carmelites, Saint Philip Neri, founder of the Oratory, and Saint John of God, founder of the Order of the Hospitaller Brothers. Saint Teresa of Avila, for example, is depicted holding the Book of the Carmelite Rules, a symbol of the reform she undertook. The sculpture was carved by Carlo Monaldi in 1731. The presence of this group of founding saints in the Galilee is not only decorative, it functions as an iconographic program which exalts religious life and the different consecrated orders, preparing the faithful for the atmosphere of devotion they will find inside. The luminous Carrara marble of the sculptures contrasts with the Limoges limestone walls and columns, creating a remarkable scenographic effect as you enter the basilica. The interior of the Basilica of Mafra is large and solemn, laid out in a Latin cross plan, and measures some 58.5 meters in length from the entrance to the chancel and 43 meters along the transept. The relative narrowness of the main nave, combined with the considerable height of 21.5 meters to the barrel vault, accentuates the verticality of the space and naturally leads the eyes of the faithful upwards towards the central dome. The entire interior is richly clad in polychrome marble. A soft pink marble predominates, extracted from Portuguese quarries such as Perpinheiro and Sintra, interspersed with bluish-grey and white marble from the Estremoz region and others, composing geometric motifs on the floor and pillars. The multicolored designs of the floor are reproduced in the coffers and decorations of the vault, creating a visual unity between the floor and the ceiling. Natural light pours in through 181 windows spread over 2 levels, highlighting the brilliance of the marble and the classical monumentality of the interior architecture. The majestic sobriety of the barrel vault that covers the central nave, built in masonry and supported by robust pillars, stands out. This vault is segmented by shallow caissons and decorated with geometric motifs that echo the colors of the floor in subtle chromatic harmony. The walls of the entire nave are devoid of pictorial ornamentation, unlike other Baroque basilicas filled with frescoes. In Mafra, the emphasis was on the materiality of marble and light in an almost neoclassical aesthetic that prefigured the taste of the late 18th century. On the back wall of the basilica, flanking the entrance, there are also 2 sculptures by Alessandro Giusti representing faith and religion. Along the north and south aisles, interspersed by the columned arches, are the 6 interconnected side chapels. Most of its masonry altarpieces are the work of the Mafra School of Sculpture, founded in 1753 by King John V's successor, King Joseph I, and directed by the master Alessandro Giusti. On the Gospel side, on the left as you enter the Basilica, are the chapels of the Holy Christ, the Holy Bishops, and Our Lady of the Rosary. On the Epistle side, on the right as you enter, are the chapels of the Holy Virgins, the Holy Confessors, and the Holy Martyrs. Each of these side chapels has a small polychrome marble altar topped by a bas-relief. On both sides there is also a vestibule that precedes the passage from the side chapels to the transept. On high pedestals inside the side chapels and vestibules, 58 marble statues depicting saints, prophets, and other biblical figures, commissioned from the best sculptors in Rome during John V's period, are lined up on niches. The slightly larger-than-life statues form a veritable gallery of 18th century Italian sculpture, which includes works by artists such as Gioacchino Fortini, Filippo della Valle, Agostino Corsini, and Giovanni Baratta, among many others. Above the chapels, along the upper walls, are the tribunes, latticed balconies from which the royal family and guests could attend masses and services, as well as the friars on certain occasions. During solemn ceremonies, it was customary for the king and his court to be present in the tribunes next to the high altar, while the rest of the tribunes were for brothers of the third orders or visiting nobles. Sacred music could also be heard from the tribunes, which brings us to the exceptional historic organs of the Basilica of Mafra, one of its greatest treasures. They were installed in 1807 and are considered unique in the world. These 6 pipe organs were designed to play together in perfect harmony, something very rare in the history of organ building. They are distributed in pairs, occupying strategically placed stands. 2 instruments are located in the chancel, one on each side of the altar, called the Gospel and Epistle organs, and 2 others in the upper part of the north transept, the organs of San Pedro de Alcântara and of the Blessed Sacrament, and 2 in the south transept, organs of Our Lady of Conception and Saint Barbara. This arrangement allows for formidable sound effects of dialogue and echo, filling the entire transept of the church with enveloping music. The construction between 1792 and 1807 was carried out by the 2 most renowned Portuguese organ builders of the time, Joaquim António Pérez Fontanes and António Xavier Machado e Cerveira, masters who had already worked in important cathedrals. Each built 3 organs according to a coordinated plan so that the ensemble could have complementary sound characteristics. The organs of Mafra have 2,000 sound pipes in total, ranging from small metal pipes of just a few centimeters to imposing wooden pipes up to 6 meters high and 28 centimeters in diameter. Inaugurated together on 4 October 1807, shortly before the Napoleonic invasion, the organs in Mafra impressed listeners with their richness of tone and power. In the same year, works were specially composed to be played on all 6 organs simultaneously. The compositions of João de Sousa Carvalho and Marcos Portugal, outstanding musicians of the court, stand out. However, with the departure of the court to Brazil in 1807 and the instability of the wars, the organs quickly fell into silence and lack of maintenance. It was only between 1998 and 2010 that a complete restoration of the 6 organs was carried out, a complex project involving international organ building teams under the guidance of organist João Vaz. Mafra is currently the only place in the world where 6 historic organs can be played simultaneously in a coordinated manner. Several events are held annually in the Basilica to exploit this peculiarity, and concerts have been recorded to raise international awareness of the magnificence of this unique organ ensemble. In the center of the church, the cross marks the intersection of the nave and transept and is crowned by a splendid hemispherical dome, an element with a strong scenographic and spiritual impact. At the time, it was the largest dome ever built in Portugal, 65 meters high and 13 meters in diameter. From the outside, this white dome with its classical profile rises to a maximum height of about 70 meters, matching the bell towers that flank it on the facade as a whole. The formal inspiration again came from Rome. Both the dome and the towers of Mafra are reminiscent of the church of Sant'Agnese in Agone, designed by Borromini, whose double tower and central dome had a decisive influence on the architect Ludwig. In Mafra, the cross rests on 4 large, finely carved pink and white marble arches, which rise from the pillars of the transept. These arches, decorated with frames and fleurons, support the octagonal drum of the dome, which has 8 elliptical windows that bathe the central space of the church in light. At the top, the spherical cap leads to a small terminal lantern, surmounted on the outside by a sphere and a bronze cross. Inside, the gates of heaven open in bas-relief. In the center is a dove with a wingspan of 1.5 meters, symbolizing the Immaculate Conception. On the north side of the transept, on the Gospel side, is the chapel of the Coronation of Our Lady, with a marble bas-relief altarpiece depicting the Virgin kneeling on musical angels being crowned by the Father and the Son in the presence of the Holy Spirit. On the south side of the transept, on the epistle side, is the Chapel of the Holy Family. Here we can see a marble altar panel carved in bas-relief depicting the Holy Family. Above, God appears surrounded by angels, with Christ holding the Virgin, who is in the center of the scene, with the child in her arms. Next to him are Saint Joseph and other saints, and in the bottom, the Agnus Dei. These sculpted panels were made in the mid-18th century by the Mafra Sculpture Workshop under the direction of Alessandro Giusti, the Italian master invited to direct this school, with the collaboration of his Portuguese disciple Joaquim Machado Castro. The decoration of these spaces is complemented by a large and beautiful collection of bronze luminaires, including the large lamps created in Italy by Giuseppe Zapati. Their quality impressed many visitors, including the British writer William Beckford, who, on seeing them when he visited Portugal in 1787, thought they were made of gold. All the iron and gilded bronze railings that precede some of the chapels are also of high quality, as they were made in Paris in the workshops of the Garnier foundry. The side chapel on the Gospel side, dedicated to St. Peter of Alcantara, is separated from the transept arm by an iron railing. On the altar, there is an oil-on canvas depicting St. Peter of Alcantara in adoration of the Virgin, attributed to the Italian painter Corrado Giaquinto. It contains large statues of 4 archangels, Saint Raphael, author unknown, Saint Michael and Saint Gabriel, sculpted by Giovanni Battista Maini, as well as the guardian angel of Portugal, attributed to the Flemish sculptor Laurent Delvaux, depicted with the arms of Portugal. In this chapel there is also a painting of the Last Supper by Filippo Laurenzi. The side chapel on the epistle side is dedicated to Our Lady of the Conception and is also enclosed with iron grills. Its altar has a retabular panel carved in bas-relief on marble depicting the patron saint of Portugal. In this sculpture, from the Mafra school, the Virgin appears above clouds and surrounded by angels, with a crescent moon and a serpent beneath her feet. In her hands she holds the child. Another marble altarpiece on the north wall depicts the Annunciation. The statues represent the Holy Family, Saint Joachim and Saint Anne, both sculpted by an unknown artist, Saint Joseph and Saint John the Baptist, both by Giovanni Baratta. This chapel also has a lunette with a depiction of the presentation of the Virgin in the temple. Finally, the chancel, which occupies the entire semicircular space of the apse of the basilica, is deep and covered with a barrel vault. The altarpiece is made of stone and consists of 2 enormous marble columns with smooth shafts and Corinthian capitals topped by a triangular pediment. It houses an oil-on canvas by the Italian Francesco Trevisani, which depicts the Virgin giving the child to Saint Anthony, alluding to the basilica's double dedication. This painting, with its warm colors and great expressive softness, is considered one of the masterpieces of 18th century painting still preserved in Portugal. Above this altarpiece is a large marble bas-relief of Christ crucified, surrounded by angels by Francesco Schiaffino. On the walls we can also see balconies and 2 organs that are part of the 6 that exist in the church. The Basilica of Mafra is also remarkable for its imposing carillons, commissioned by King John V in 1730 from the famous foundries in the Netherlands. 2 twin carillons were made, one in Liège by Nicolaus Levache, installed in the North Tower, and one in Antwerp by Willem Witlox, installed in the South Tower. Traditionally, there are 92 bells between the 2 carillons, but recent studies suggest a total of 98 bells, taking into account the smaller bells used to mark the hours. This ensemble is the largest 18th century carillon in the world, weighing several hundred tons of bronze. The bells range in size from 2.7 kilos to 12 tons and are considered to be the largest ever made for a carillon. The order for the carillons is a good illustration of King John V's ostentation. When informed that one carillon would cost 400,000 reis, an exorbitant amount for the time, the king ironically replied that he wanted two. The bells were solemnly blessed in the church of Saint-Antoine du Tujol before being transported to Mafra in huge ox carts escorted by infantry, attracting popular curiosity along the way. The first time the bells rang in Mafra was during the solemn mass for the consecration of the basilica on 22 October 1730, although the ensemble was not yet complete. Each tower not only has bells but also advanced mechanisms for the time, capable of playing up to 16 pieces of music automatically, making them truly monumental music boxes. Over the years, these carillons have faced maintenance problems, especially in the 19th and 20th centuries, ending up almost inactive due to structural wear and tear and detuning. Between 2018 and 2020, they underwent extensive restoration as part of an overall project to restore the monument, with the participation of specialized international teams. The vast royal building of Mafra also includes what is the largest palace in Portugal. It has been in use since its construction in the first half of the 18th century until the end of the monarchy in 1910 as a residence for the royal family when they travelled there to attend religious festivals or to go hunting. Following the French model of palaces such as Versailles or Chambord, originally created as residences for the hunting season, King John V combined the royal residence with the convent, creating a symbol that synthesized his royal and religious power. The north and south towers, corresponding respectively to the king's and queen's apartments, are separated by a 232-meter-long corridor, the longest of its kind in Europe. Let us now take a closer look at the main areas of this palace. The Hall of Diana is named after the decoration painted on its ceiling by the artist Cyril Volkmar Machado, depicting Diana, the Roman goddess of hunting, and her nymphs. A painting on the upper wall simulates a half-open door, revealing a scene with Selene, goddess of the moon, and her lover, the shepherd Endymion. On the wall hangs a Brussels tapestry from the workshop of Jan Liniers, depicting Alexander the Great receiving Thalestris, queen of the Amazons. We can also see a portrait of King John V, who had this palace built. This room was also known as the Hall of Torches, because a candle was kept lit here at night. The throne room or audience hall was the venue for royal audiences and the hand-kissing ceremony, which emphasized the paternal and protective role of the king, as well as the submission of his subjects. This ritual was abolished in 1860 by King Peter V, who considered it an obsolete act of civility. The ceiling painting in this room, also by Cyril Volkmar Machado, depicts the guardian angel of Portugal, surrounded by ministers, soldiers, scholars, and clerics, protecting the royal family with his shield. On the walls, Domingos António de Cerqueira painted in fresco the 8 royal virtues: perfection, tranquility, goodness, knowledge, generosity, peace, perseverance, and diligence. The chairs we can see in this room were created for the unveiling of the equestrian statue of King Joseph I in Lisbon's Praça do Comércio in 1775. In his royal apartments, located in the North Tower, the king had a private oratory. It contains a painting by Inácio de Oliveira Bernardes depicting Saint Joseph and the Virgin Mary. The ceiling was painted by Cirilo Volkmar Machado in gratitude for the birth of the Princess Maria Teresa, representing the guardian angel of Portugal with a child in his arms and kissing a banner with the title Most Faithful, given by the Pope to the kings of Portugal. In the same tower there is a large hall that served as the king's reception room and office, as well as a space for family gatherings. Today we can see pieces of 18th century Portuguese furniture and 4 paintings that were commissioned by King John V for the basilica and the convent around 1730. The king's bedroom has a French Empire-style state bed that belonged to Maria Leopoldina of Austria, Empress of Brazil, wife of Pedro I of Brazil. It later belonged to Queen Maria II of Portugal. On the walls is a portrait of King John VI by José Inácio de Sampaio and a painting of the Holy Family with a gilded rococo frame. It is followed by the long enfilade, a succession of rooms forming the aforementioned palace corridor linking the north and south towers, one of the largest in Europe. These halls were used for the parades of the royals and their entourage. The Sala dos Vedores, room of the inspectors, was used by the noble officials in charge of administering finances. It is also known as the Hall of Discoveries, due to the painting on the ceiling, made in 1804 by Cirilo Volkmar Machado and Bernardo António de Oliveira Góis, evoking the Age of Discoveries. The painting depicts Prince Henry the Navigator, Vasco da Gama, Pedro Álvares Cabral and Christopher Columbus. This room also houses a portrait of the child Peter, the future Peter II, aged 15, by Pierre-Antoine Quillard. The Hall of Portugal's Destinies has an impressive painting on the ceiling and on the upper part of the walls, also by Cirilo Volkmar Machado, depicting the genealogy of the Portuguese royal house. Afonso Henriques, founder of the kingdom, looks at the Book of Portugal's Destiny, surrounded by several of his ancestors and descendants. On the walls there are 2 large canvases, a portrait of Queen Maria I holding a miniature image of her uncle and husband Peter III, and an allegory depicting the Duke of Wellington paving the way for the return of the Portuguese royal family after 13 years of exile in Brazil. Next is the Long Hall of the King's Guard, which originally housed the archers who guarded the monarch. On its ceiling is a beautiful painting by the ubiquitous Cirilo Volkmar Machado depicting the precipice of Phaethon. Phaethon, son of Helios, the Roman god of the sun, took the reins of the chariot that his father used to travel the skies, but if he failed to stay on course, he risked destroying the earth. Zeus, to avoid a catastrophe, was forced to hurl a thunderbolt at him, causing him to fall into the river Eridanus. On the walls of this room we can see several canvases depicting personalities from the history of Rome and a painting by Antonio Manuel de Fonseca, dated 1855, depicting Aeneas saving his father Anchises from the fire of Troy. The room of John V contains the portraits of the royal couple, King John V and Queen Maria Anna of Austria. It also contains 2 Carrara marble medallions and gilded furniture from the late 18th century. In the middle of the complex, occupying the central part of the main facade and connected to the basilica, is the Gallery of the Blessing. It was used by the royal family and the court to attend religious services, but also to greet the public through the 3 large balconies overlooking the exterior. The decoration of this space is in keeping with that of the basilica, using different colored marble on the floor, walls, and vaulted ceiling, producing an effect of extraordinary beauty. In the center of this space is an exceptional Carrara marble sculpture by Alessandro Giusti, who was the first director of the Royal School of Sculpture in Mafra, depicting King John V as the protector of the liberal arts. The Chamberlain's Hall, reserved for members of the nobility who served royalty, has a striking ceiling painted by Cyril Volkmar Machado with the chevrons of Portugal in the center. They are surrounded by various gods from classical mythology in an allegory of the fertile offspring of Princes João and Carlota Joaquina. Next to the royal apartments, in the South Tower, reserved for the Queen, is her private oratory, with a painting by Inácio de Oliveira Bernardes, dated 1730, depicting Our Lady of Livramento. Five paintings commissioned by King John V for the basilica and the convent can be seen in the large central room of this tower, which was used for the monarch's service, by painters such as Vieira Lusitano, Agostino Masucci, Corrado Giaquinto, Francisco Mancini and Stefano Pozzi. The Queen's room, decorated with paintings on the walls, contains a bed that belonged to King Peter V. It was here that the last king of Portugal, Manuel II, slept on the night of 4 to 5 October 1910, the date of the establishment of the Republic and the end of the monarchy. This room has a bathroom finely decorated with wall paintings of bucolic scenes depicting birds, and the ceiling is covered with a large fabric with floral motifs. The Brazil room contains the portraits of the Brazilian imperial family, in particular the portrait of King John VI, painted by Máximo Paulino dos Reis in 1824. The ceiling of the room is painted with depictions of the royal coat of arms. The guests waiting to be announced and received by the royal family remained in the waiting room, also known as the Peter V room, because of the 1855 painting of this king by Henri Petit, which dominates the attention on the wall. Next to it is the music room, where guests were received by the royal family. Here we can see a Joseph Kirkman grand piano, which belonged to the Queen Maria Pia, and a Collard and Collard table piano, both from the 19th century. The palace also includes a games room, which has a spinning top game, a Chinese billiards, a large French billiards, and a billiards table. The room is decorated with 2 paintings by Silverport dating from 1880. The Ferdinand II room, dedicated to this Austro-Hungarian king consort who was married to Queen Maria II, is decorated with deer antler furniture, a style introduced in Portugal by this monarch. This furniture heralds the hunting trophy room that follows, which was originally a space where the fanfare played. After 1910, it was redecorated with hunting trophies collected at the Tapada de Mafra. These trophies were previously kept in a room on the lower floor. There are also paintings on the walls, such as one depicting a hunt by King Miguel I in Mafra and another of the same king in Vendas Novas. The bedroom of Princess Maria Francisca Benedita belonged to the younger sister of Queen Maria I, married to Joseph, Prince of Brazil, who died at the young age of 27. This princess, who lived to the age of 83, was always a person of high status at court, having had a large asylum for military invalids built in Runa in Torres Vedras. The Carlos I room houses a collection of musical instruments given to that king when he visited the island of Madeira. It also has a watercolor depicting this monarch painted in 1902 by Roque Gameiro. The dining room recreates the atmosphere of a 19th century royal dining room. Inside the porcelain cupboards, a wide variety of Chinese and French porcelain and silverware is kept. As a curiosity, the table and chairs in this room were created by the inmates of the Lisbon Penitentiary and were a gift from them to King Charles I. Finally, the room that contains a model of the National Palace of Mafra made of beech wood. It was created in 2017 to be part of the exhibition commemorating the tercentenary of this national monument. At the beginning, the Mafra project included the construction of a small convent for only 13 Capuchin friars of the Order of St. Francis, as a fulfillment of King John V's vow of gratitude for the birth of an heir. When it was decided to include a new royal palace in the complex, the original planning was completely altered and the convent became a community of 1,300 friars. The architect Johann Friedrich Ludwig had worked for the Jesuits at the Church of Jesus in Rome, where he had studied. Perhaps this is why the convent of Mafra integrated a utilitarian construction model inspired by the Jesuit Modo Nostro. In 1730, 328 Franciscan friars joined the community of Mafra, coming from several convents in the region that had been ordered to be extinguished by royal decree. In 1771, the Franciscans were sent to the convent of Arrábida, near Setúbal, given their small numbers at the time. The convent then housed canons regular of St. Augustine, transferred to Mafra from the monastery of São Vicente Fora in Lisbon. However, in 1791, the Franciscan friars returned here again. At the peak of the convent's occupation, 120 barrels of wine, 70 barrels of olive oil, around 10 tons of rice, and 600 cows were consumed here every year. After the extinction of the religious orders in 1834, the convent was not sold at public auction as it was part of the crown's patrimony. In 1841, part of the building was ceded to the Portuguese army, and in 1887 the Infantry and Cavalry Practical School was established there, which then became in 1890 exclusively the Infantry Practical School until 2013, when it became the School of Arms. Today we can visit some of the rooms that formed part of the convent's infirmary, including some of the cells used by the friar nurses. It was sparsely decorated and contained only the essentials for the daily life of the religious. There we can see the bed frames, on which simple straw mattresses were placed, containers for personal hygiene, tables for reading and writing, and small shelves for storing books. This hospital followed the hygienic precepts of the time and consisted of several individual rooms for patients in isolation and convalescent patients. It also had rooms for medical staff and consulting rooms. In the infirmary, the friar nurses, the doctor and the bleeder attended to the sick, who were housed in 16 compartments with beds facing the altar at the back of the room so that they could attend Mass. The infirmary has the only kitchen that can be visited in the royal building of Mafra. It was used to cook meals for patients and medical staff. Here we can see various copper pots, mortars and pestles, grinding mills and other kitchen utensils. Another important space was the apothecary, where medicinal infusions, elixirs and ointments used to treat patients were prepared and stored. Some plants grown in the convent's garden were used in this process. The Jardim do Cerco, as it is still called today, served the religious community and contained an orchard, a vegetable garden, woods and landscaped areas. There we can also see a well with an ancient noria used to collect water. But the most impressive space in this convent and palace complex is the library, one of the largest European libraries in the 18th century, which extends over a single huge room of 1,000 square meters. It is cruciform in plan, 404 spans long, 110 spans wide at the transept and 43 spans wide in the aisles. The height of the vault is 49 spans, except in the transept, where it reaches 60 spans. Some 36,000 volumes are collected here, reflecting the many themes of Enlightenment culture, combining religious and theological themes with the rational and scientific knowledge of the time. There are books on medicine, pharmacy, history, geography, literature, philosophy, architecture, art and law, among other subjects, as well as an important collection of music books. The latter includes scores by composers such as Marcos de Portugal, João de Sousa Carvalho, José Joaquim dos Cantos, and João José Baldi, some of which were intended to be played on the basilica's 6 organs. This vast library also includes several incunabula, books printed in the 15th century, and a number of manuscript and illuminated books, such as the Books of Hours, also from the 15th century. The bookcases were designed by Mafra's architect Manuel Caetano de Souza, but they were never finished. The marble-like paintings, the gilded friezes, and the portraits of writers that would have filled the oval frames are missing. These shelves were installed in 1776, at the end of the reign of Joseph I, and it was not until 1791 that the books were placed on them. At the beginning of the 19th century, Friar João de Santa Ana completed the second inventory of the books, and his organization of the volumes remains almost unchanged to this day. The northern section was reserved for religious books, while the southern section was for the exact sciences and civil subjects. 2 colonies of bats live here and disinfect the library, consuming the insects that affect the wood and books. The importance and specificity of this library were immediately confirmed by Pope Benedict XIV's bull of 1754, which authorized the possession of books banned by the Index Librorum Prohibitorum, the index of books banned by the Catholic Church. This authorization prohibited the borrowing or misappropriation of any volume from this library under penalty of excommunication. Friar João de Santa Ana hid these forbidden books in shelves on the upper floor to limit access only to those who had a key. In this, one of the most beautiful libraries in the world, we can find several volumes dealing with subjects that, back then, challenged the conventions established by the Church of Rome and the society of the time. Dated 1533, this publication signed by Cornelius Agrippa compiles 3 hermetic books on magic in a single volume. Topics range from magic in the natural world to the celestial and mathematical worlds, from pagan deities to ceremonial magic. One of the most important demonological treatises of the 18th century, this work by Martín del Rio denied the power of magical words and figures, vehemently attacking all kinds of superstitions. Fundamental to Hermetic philosophy, which had a great revival during the Renaissance in Europe, the Corpus Hermeticum, here in an edition of 1574, is also on the shelves of the Mafra Library. Among the collection of banned books was this volume by Jean Bodin, dated 1587, which defined the concepts of sorcerer and witchcraft, considering magicians a social danger. The 1613 treatise by Jean-Jacques Boissard, on the other hand, deals with the prophets of antiquity, as well as with subjects such as lycanthropy, incubi, and succubi, the latter 2 being demons who had carnal relations with human beings. Published in 1668, this manual for exorcists features a curious illustration of an exorcism in its cover. The priest's prayer provokes the expulsion of 2 little devils, which come out of the body of the afflicted person. The Inquisitor General of the Kingdom of Aragon, Nicolas Aymeric, created a work, here in an edition of 1578, which predates the famous Malleus Maleficarum. It describes methods of torture, manipulation, and psychological pressure to extract confessions from alleged witches. A 1616 copy of the Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of the Witches, is also preserved in Mafra, one of the most popular books in the fight against witchcraft and a real guide for the Inquisitors, describing terrible torture techniques. Also in the section of banned books was this work by Gerolamo Cardano, the creator of metaposcopy, a technique that claimed to be able to recognize a person's character, strengths and weaknesses through the lines on their face. The prophecies of Nostradamus, the famous French physician, astrologer and seer, also appear in this collection, in a work that proposes their interpretation and decoding. The world of alchemy is represented, among others, by these three works by Robert Flirt. The first, from 1633, contains symbolic illustrations inspired by the Kabbalah, material magic, alchemy and astrology. The second speaks of how the divine light illuminates the universe, nature, and man. The third holds that man is the reflection of a macrocosm composed of harmonized dynamics. The curious and fascinating Mutus Liber, a booklet of unknown authorship, illustrates the path of the alchemical work in 15 engraved pages. The existing Mafra edition of 1702 was published by Jean-Jacques Manger. In a work by Francisco Manuel de Melo, published in 1724, the Kabbalah is discussed, explaining its meaning, the origin of its terms, its history, and its connection with the Jewish people. Cogent writing and cryptographic techniques also have their place in the Mafra library. From Athanasius Kircher, with a work teaching the rules and combinatorial logic of cryptography, to the volumes of Johannes Trithemius, which are authentic references in the history of the creation of encrypted messages, there was nothing missing in this extensive and absolutely fascinating collection of volumes. In the centuries following its creation, the number of books in the library of the royal building in Mafra was reported as being around 60,000 volumes, according to William Beckford in 1787, to about 25,000 books, according to Lady Jackson in 1873. We know that the library has received several donations over the years, such as that of the architect Joaquim Posidónio in 1889, who offered more than 1,300 books on artistic and scientific subjects. However, some books took a different path as a result of criminal activity. In 1904, a Frenchman named Gaston Spiraton stole 3 16th century works from the Royal Library of Mafra. The press at the time reported what happened, as well as the subsequent capture of the thief in Oporto and his bringing to justice. Later, in 1938, the head of the library, José da Costa Jorge, who had succeeded Eduardo de Sousa Gomes in 1920, the former curator who ended his life in a library room, was arrested by the authorities. He was accused of being involved in the theft of 70 rare books from the library's collection, including 6 incunabula, which were never recovered, as well as a considerable number of engravings. In May 1939, José da Costa Jorge was sentenced to 2 years in prison for this crime. Only a small number of the books were recovered, and it is presumed that some were sold to English collectors. But these criminal cases are only the surface of the curious stories and myths that have been built around the royal building of Mafra. This dimension will be explored in the next section. In a monument as vast as the royal building of Mafra, with more than 3 centuries of history, it was inevitable that the popular imagination would take hold of it. Speculation and exaggeration led to the creation of legends and myths as exuberant as the building itself. Is it possible for a palace or a convent to exist without a spectre haunting it? Hardly, which is why this monument also has its own ghost, known as the Headless Captain. According to legend, this figure wandered the south corridor of the palace, causing fear to all those he came across, particularly the young recruits who had just arrived at the military facility. The ghost would be dressed in a Napoleonic-era uniform, wandering restlessly in search of the head he had lost in battle. Another version suggests that the ghostly captain was decapitated by a watchman who, hearing the sound of footsteps, drew his sword and killed his commander with a single blow. The headless captain then continued to walk the corridors of the building to check that the sentries were at their posts and on alert. This aspect gives important clues as to the origin of this myth, the ghost being a clever ruse created by the military to keep the new recruits at the practical infantry school on their toes, thus imposing discipline. Stories of ghostly encounters have been passed down through the centuries by word of mouth, often resulting in the alteration of the original legend. In other versions, the ghost was the spirit of one of the thousands of workers who lost their lives during the construction of the building. But the mysterious inhabitants of the royal building of Mafra do not stop there. Another story tells of a heinous crime that supposedly took place around 1759 on the premises of this building, the legend of the Imurd. The governor of the royal palace supposedly received a letter with a secret request that he could not refuse. He called 2 laborers who worked in the convent, a carpenter to build a coffin and a mason to make a hole in the wall and put it inside. With everything ready, a carriage arrived with 2 masked men carrying someone still alive in a sack and groaning in anguish. The person was then placed inside the coffin and then in the hole made in the wall, which was closed. Years later, after the death of the Marquis of Pombal, the mason was in the last days of his life. Unable to bear the burden of these sinister events, he decided to confess what had happened to a friar. The friars, hearing this rumor, decided to go and check the place indicated by the stonemason and found a covered coffin. Inside was a skeleton, which according to some versions of the legend, was that of a woman. The Franciscans then removed the remains from that place and gave them a dignified burial in the convent cemetery. It is curious that this story mentions dates. The walling would have taken place in 1759 and the Marquis of Pombal died in 1782, which establishes a time reference. There is no documentation from the period mentioning these or similar events. The legend of the Imurd of the convent of Mafra, despite the lack of documentary evidence, clearly evokes an imaginary already established in the Portuguese literary and popular tradition, that of the walled nuns. Stories such as those described by Camilo Castelo Branco in The Underground Nun fueled, in the 19th century, a tragic and sensationalist view of conventual spaces as places of confinement, repression, and extreme punishment. Although Mafra never received female orders, the idea of a body hidden within stone walls responds to a similar symbolic logic, the deadly secret hidden under the weight of sacred architecture, where institutional silence is as thick as the walls. It is impossible not to recall other literary tales of the mysterious and macabre, such as The Cask of Amontillado by the great American writer Edgar Allan Poe. It is at this crossroads between legend, literature, and memory that the story of the Immured finds its deepest echo. But the most famous myths about Mafra are those about the immense tunnels beneath the monument that would not only extend vast distances, but would also be inhabited by nightmarish creatures. The idea that Mafra's underground is inhabited by huge mutant rats is probably the one with which the general public is most familiar and has been the subject of newspaper articles and television reports. According to this urban legend, the convent's underground tunnels are home to thousands of huge, blind, albino rats bigger than rabbits. It is said they are able to consume cats, dogs, and even cows. The legend tells that these tunnels were sealed from the outside with armored doors, and that members of the infantry practical school, housed in the former convent, fed animal carcasses to the rats. This urban legend probably originated in the real-life episode of the soldier known as Corradinho, who in 1971 fell 30 meters into one of the sewer ventilators when he was catching pigeons in the terraces of the building, accompanied by 2 soldiers. The latter, fearing reprisals, did not tell their superiors what had happened. Corradinho was only discovered 3 days later, when his body was already decomposing and one of his earlobes had been eaten by rodents. Most dramatically, the soldier would have survived the fall, but the lack of immediate assistance resulted in his death. The situation quickly took an unrealistic and exaggerated turn, with insinuations that the soldier had fallen victim to the giant rats of Mafra. The stories included even more outlandish details, such as the alleged need for the military to equip themselves with flamethrowers in order to advance through the tunnels and get rid of the rats in order to reach the body of the deceased soldier. The myth gained layers. It was rumored that the German company Bayer had submitted a project to disinfect the monument's drains with poison. The plan would have involved evacuating the convent and the entire city for 15 days, but it never materialized because it was deemed too expensive. In the 1980s, the city council pointed out that it had no money for rat extermination, and a former councillor said that the company itself was responsible for publicizing the news, which Bayer has denied through its spokesman. The story received so much press coverage that in 1984 a group of academics used the uncontrolled presence of rats in Mafra as a reason to oppose the possible transfer of the National Archives from Lisbon to one of the wings of the convent. The rumor seems to have served all those who invoked it over time. For the military, it was a way of keeping recruits on their toes, for the press, it was a way of attracting readers, and, in the case of archivists, it functioned as a strategy to avoid unwanted trips. Another Mafra myth claims that there is a long tunnel linking Mafra Palace to the town of Ericeira, some 8 kilometers away, allegedly used in 1910 by King Manuel II to flee after the establishment of the Republic. On 3 October 1910, the king left his mother in Sintra and went to dinner in Lisbon, where Teixeira de Sousa informed him that the Republican Revolution would begin that night. After dinner, Manuel II remained in Lisbon at the Necessidades Palace. He spent the night playing bridge, unable to sleep. The army bombarded the palace at 1:30 in the morning, almost reaching the monarch's chambers. The king fled by car to Mafra Palace at around 2 p.m. on 4 October, where he arrived in deep shock and emotion. Dr. Tomás Melo Brainer administered a dose of valerian to the king, who slept until 6:30 in the morning of 5 October. After the raising of the Republican flag in Mafra, the royal family realized that the monarchy was over, traveling by car with the minimum of luggage and accompanied by faithful servants to Ericeira. There, the royal yacht Amélia awaited them, to which Manuel II was transported in a fishing boat, the Bonfim, and the queens followed in the Navegador. After a dramatic farewell, the monarch went into exile in Gibraltar and subsequently travelled to London. The royal building of Mafra, due to its enormous size, has sewers and tunnels for rainwater drainage and sanitation, but they are nowhere near the size suggested by popular myths. All these myths reflect the impact that this national monument has on the imagination of those who visit it, those who have lived in it, and those who observe it. They are also part of the perennial fascination of this building, which since 2019 has been recognized by UNESCO as a World Heritage Site. Thank you for discovering Portugal with us. If you liked the video, please click on the like button and subscribe to the channel to follow our new releases.